Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are located in the world. Thanks for joining us today. This is Nick Roberts. I am the head of research and marketing for Global App Testing, and it is a cold and brisky weather outside here in London, but we are here in London, and joining me today is Fahim Sashidina. He is a quality evangelist. He also works here at Global App Testing as well, but he has delivered talks all over the world about proving the value of QA in your organization. So I'm really thankful for you joining me here today, Fahim, and I'm going to be moderating the chat. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat box in the bottom right corner. We've got this nifty translation widget that's plugged in here. So if the question, if you don't speak native English, but you want to type in a question anyway, go for it. And we'll do our best to use that translation tool in there as well. And there will also be an option for questions and answers later on in the presentation as well. We will be recording this, and so we will be able to send it out. So if any of your colleagues weren't able to attend, or you just loved it so much you want to watch it again because you really want to prove the value of QA in your organization, we can absolutely get that to you as well. And make sure you stay through to the very end because we've got a very special offer, a very special gift for everybody that's in attendance as well. And I think you are going to absolutely love it. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the reins to Fahim.
Thank you very much, Nick. And thank you everyone for joining today from wherever you are in the world. I'm always excited to speak to people about the value of QA, mainly because there is so much potential in the work that we do to prove business impact and to prove the values to how we can actually impact not just the work that we do and not just our teams, but also how we can help improve businesses and how we improve products and how we ultimately improve people's lives and quality of life. So I'm really, really excited to speak about the value of QA and to maybe give a bit of a background. So a lot of the information that we are going to be delivering within this webinar has also been kind of written out in a 2.5-year labor of love, which is a book that we'd written called Leading Quality, on how great leaders can essentially release high quality software and impact business growth. So a lot of the work is within this book that we have, and as Nick was alluding to, there may or may not be a special gift at the end of this webinar if you stick around for that, but I'll also give a bit more information throughout. I think just before I kick off, I also wanted to say, please submit some questions into the chat. We've got a couple of polls that we've set up throughout this webinar as well. So I'm excited to get into it. So I'll shoot away. Alrighty. Cool. So what I'm going to be speaking about today with regards to the value of QA is a couple of different ideas and snippets from the research that we've done while interviewing about 120 different engineering, products, and quality leaders all across the world in different sorts of organizations, from the likes of Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Spotify, P&G, Sprint, GitHub, and numerous others as well. So the first idea we're going to be speaking about around proving the value of QA is how you go about creating a culture of quality within your organization. What does quality ownership actually look like? Why is this important, and how you can implement this within your own company, no matter where your culture or the way that quality is spoken about within the company at the moment. The second idea is more applicable around how we go about increasing the value that QA actually brings to the organization. So how do we translate that into a language that business folks and C-suite members actually understand? And how do we connect up the language and the narrative between the two of those different areas and different departments? As we all know, everyone has their own interest and focus and have their own goals and objectives and KPIs, but it's about relating to other people's hopes and dreams and motivations and fears. And we're going to get a lot into that to say, how can we actually deeply influence others and persuade them around the value while also proving the value of the work that we're doing too. So going back to idea one and being able to prove out the culture of quality and how to actually create this culture of quality, it all comes down to something that we discovered called the quality narrative. Now, the quality narrative is the way that people think and talk about quality within your own company right now. And this plays out whether you believe there is one in your organization or whether there isn't. And lots of different companies have different ways to think about the culture of quality within their companies right now. And I think we're going to get into a lot more detail as to how this is thought out at the moment and how companies have created this culture of quality narrative and led it, and how it has influence to where they are today. So yes, pretty much reiterating what I was saying around, yes, a culture of quality does exist within your own narrative at the moment, whether there's a narrative or not. And it's really about getting a clear understanding as to what your current narrative actually is, so that's easy for you to put the necessary steps in place to change that narrative and make the changes that you require and need. But what we've seen is that there have been a number of different narratives that other companies have had from the research that we've done. So what we found is there have really been three common narratives that companies have used within their organizations, and these three kind of narratives have led how they need quality within their companies. So the first one essentially is a foundational narrative around ownership. So who is actually responsible for quality within your organization? So when a good narrative or a good ownership narrative is in place, there's usually a higher focus on quality throughout the company, where different departments, not just engineering, not just QA, not just, let's say, the test center of excellence are focused on quality, but actually everyone from the design team, to the customer support team, to the marketing and sales team, think about how they can improve quality at the application and software level, so that the company can ultimately release much better and higher quality products, and therefore lead to less friction throughout the organization. So again, before, and I guess a lot of how these teams used to work, and we'll give a couple of specific examples on this, test and engineering teams were really the only people responsible for quality. And this might play out in your organization right now, where only those teams look at quality and are pretty much the gatekeepers around quality. However, as the speed of development has essentially increased, and the velocity of tools such as, or at least approaches around DevOps, continuous integration, continuous deployment, has led to the introduction of more and more teams getting involved in the software development lifecycle process, and therefore baking quality into the process earlier is imperative for teams looking to release much higher levels of kind of quality products. And one example we wanted to give is of Snapchat. So a really quick example here. So in 2017, Snapchat faced a lot of pressure from, as a lot of people probably know, a pretty underwhelming IPO around their growth stalling, and they had a lot of different issues when it came to releasing the different sorts of applications, specifically their Android app, in a lot of different markets, or more specifically the emerging markets. And due to this sluggish growth across Android, their Google Play reviews were full of complaints about how buggy their application was. Users on Reddit were demanding to know, why things were so bad, why was no one focusing on it? Is anyone actually focusing on the Android app? And it turned out that a lot of the issues plaguing the Android app were driven from a top-down approach. So it was by management, who ended up saying to Evan Spiegel, the CEO, and the management had decided to prioritize iOS applications, and they believed that it would generate a greater revenue per user, as opposed to if they decided to focus and double down on quality for Android. Now, this seems like, in hindsight, sure, quite a logical decision. However, when you take into account that Android actually accounts for 77% of the amount of usage across mobile, and therefore used by around 2.5 billion people globally, there's a big market that you are pretty much ignoring, and a market that you are pretty much saying no to and moving away from. And obviously that's a lot of people that you're neglecting and moving away from, and that was something which I think you looked to try and address. However, during this time, and while they weren't focusing on Android and kind of doubling down on iOS, Instagram capitalized on this void. And obviously they took a huge group of Snapchat's dissatisfied customers, and it led to a kind of huge migration and crossover to Instagram, which catapulted their own growth and led to a high level of momentum around the work that they were doing as well. So regardless of whether their strategy, Snapchat's strategy, was good or bad, the main takeaway here is really the awareness around a top-down kind of management level approach when it comes to thinking about quality. When really quality can be affected from all different parts, from the management side, it can be detected from more the lack of kind of testing approach and practice from the engineering and the quality teams and the decisions they make, as well as where they decide to dedicate resource when investing in quality. And as a piece of software goes from idea to production, many different teams are involved in the quality of the product. And as quality leaders inside your own company, we must look at quality as a holistic responsibility across lots of different departments and areas taking on the ownership around quality, so that we can have a more open and kind of diverse ownership narrative that understands the importance of high quality strategy, or at least high quality products to market. So again, it's really about widening that ownership narrative and having lots of different departments focused on improving the quality and baking in quality from the outset. And one part and one way that a lot of companies have done this is around setting up cross-functional teams to focus on product quality. So when you set up cross-functional teams, they would own, let's say, a KPI around quality, but they would focus on looking at implementing quality from different areas. So for example, programmers would look at pair programming or implementing pull requests, for instance, or other areas such as canary or feature flag releases, or having discussions with members in the QA and the quality team, as well as even with external stakeholders, to ensure that what they're building is the right thing that they should be building, and that they are baking in quality from the beginning by implementing, let's say, unit tests, integration tests, automated tests, etc. But at the same time, focusing on more of a test-driven development or business-driven, behavior-driven development perspective as well. And really, it's about recognizing that the interdependence between these teams is what allows us to create a quality product that is, in of essence, part of the ownership narrative too. So the second sort of narrative that we see a lot of companies fall into here is the how to test narrative. And so this kind of narrative talks about kind of something where industry leaders, or at least industry, let's say, tool vendors, can advocate for the right way to test, which typically involves kind of using a particular type of product or tool or area that leads to a quality strategy. Ultimately, what we've realized from the research is that it's never really a tool-led discussion, but more of a outcome and customer-driven led discussion. So as opposed to focusing on the type of tool you're using, it's really about focusing on what is it that the customer actually wants and the end user wants that's going to be affecting them the most, that we can do to impact quality in the most positive way. And so one thing that we've seen a lot of teams do is think that there is some sort of silver bullet, or adopt a silver bullet mentality, whereby there is one particular type of testing approach or tool that might be doubling down on end-to-end tests, to using Selenium and Appium extensively, to a range of other kind of tools and vendors that are in the market. And I think this is ever expanding in terms of the tool set that companies can use. But when we, and I always think about it when I'm playing with my nephews, or any, I coach kind of football and tennis on the weekends, and whenever I'm coaching, or whenever I'm giving advice to my nephews and nieces whenever they're playing sport, there's never ever one way of doing it. There's not one way of being able to strike a ball really well, or being able to play chess really well, or even playing ping pong in a certain way, or playing tennis in a certain way, or even when you're playing a board game. There's not one particular type of way or approach that I use when I'm playing Cluedo or Monopoly. There's always a different strategy that needs to be adopted depending on the players that I'm playing against, depending on what I have available, the resources I have available, and there are multiple approaches to go about taking here. And the same is true when it comes to how we test. So one size does not fit all. And we commonly see a lot of companies over-relying on one type of testing, or bouncing from one idea to another in the hope that there's a magic fix for their quality issues. But from all the companies that we've worked with and then interviewed, we've seen that it's really the companies that take a more blended approach that proves to be the most successful, based on the different types of testing that they might be using. It might be a combination of unit tests, integration tests, exploratory tests. It might be utilizing some sort of localization related software, but at the same time also using real people in the real world to carry out your testing. And it's really about testing ultimately comes down to reducing risk and getting different types of information to then make better decisions that help us build a much higher level of quality product. So that's really what it comes down to when you have the silver bullet mentality, and why it's important to move away from that. Now, a lot of companies also we decide to copy out of context. I know that we're guilty of this, and we've done this a lot, where you read an incredible article and you go around to your team and say, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to implement, this is the right way to go about doing it. And essentially, by copying someone else's tactics without truly understanding why they did it or the unique situation that that company was in, it ends up kind of having egg on our face at the end, whereby ultimately it doesn't work based on our unique approach to what we've already done, or taking into context the decisions, the people, the culture within our own internal organizations. And I think we've also done this work internally, where if we've asked 10 engineers to build the same feature, we would likely get 10 different approaches on how they build software, how they would continue to build a particular feature, based on the approach that they have, their own inbuilt learnings, and their history of how they've experienced the industry so far. And with all those variations, you may need to test things in a completely different way. So having numerous ideas on how we test is incredibly important to take into context the maturity of the team, the infrastructure, the resources and the budget to make sure that we're heading in the right direction here. And so to kind of summarize on that, the how to test narrative really focuses on two fundamental things. The first is that there are always going to be different testing methods available, and there's a number of different things to focus on, different benefits, limitations, and types of information that we're trying to achieve. And the second thing is the importance of having a much clearer understanding as to the context of your own company. So what level are we at in terms of maturity for the product, for the team, for the actual company itself, in terms of our company journey or our product lifecycle journey as well. And this context really changes the choices that we make when it comes to the stages of development that we wish to focus on, and ensure that we're always evolving across that. So this narrative shouldn't be static. It should always be allowing you to change and be adaptable to a certain level of change. And so the final narrative here is the value narrative. So the value narrative really looks at the ROI and the return on investment from investing in quality, and actually tying the level of quality to some sort of business ROI/revenue metrics here. So a lot of companies, agree that quality and testing are important, but when we dig deeper in terms of those internal conversations around investing in quality, it's interesting to look at who actually says that quality is more of an investment that needs to be maximized, as opposed to a cost that should be minimized here. And we find that management teams aren't really convinced at times about the tangible value of investing in quality until their company actually experiences a significant quality issue. So if there's a bug which has gone to market, or if there's been a report on a reputable news site, then only then when we find that quality is something that actually comes to mind and something that they would like to go about addressing. But it's always more of a reactive nature rather than something that should be proactive from the outset. And so really, revenue potential is one of the key and most important areas that companies look at here. And so really there are three things that companies can do to tie quality into the revenue potential, or at least try to reframe the conversation. And we're going to get into some of this in a little bit more detail later on in the webinar, but I just wanted to give a high level about some of those things. So the first is about improving the company's core growth metrics. So the growth metric is the one fundamental metric that companies can use to influence the business growth. So if you're only focusing on one KPI or one metric, what is that? For us, for example, here at Global App Testing, it's the number of tests. So the more companies that run tests with us, the higher that our growth is therefore likely to be. The second area is around describing how an increase in speed actually improves the time to market. So if we can improve speed while also maintaining or at least increasing quality, that ultimately leads to us releasing higher quality products to the market faster, and therefore allows us to be in a much more competitive, or at least have a competitive advantage when it comes to releasing products. And the final area is about uncovering additional value to the customer. So really this comes down to being able to understand the different personas that companies need to test to better understand how we can serve those personas and those customers, and ultimately build much better products that they're going to enjoy from really observing how they use products well. Now, the second area when it comes to the value narrative is on savings. So again, this looks at what is the actual monetary value of the team's time, how much time are teams actually spending focused on implementation of new tools, adopting those new tools, reworking tests, and how valuable is their time and is it being used in the right way? So it's really worthwhile to look at the opportunity cost in this particular way, as well as what are the savings by thinking for the long term, by not compromising on the work that we want to do in the short term, and therefore hopefully save on some level of infrastructure costs. This might be cloud costs, it might be test automation costs, it might be other relevant infrastructure costs in and around how you think about tooling, test data, or a variety of other areas too. And ultimately, companies are trying to reduce risk. So risk, the risk of having a critical issue which arrives in production is often one of the primary reasons why management decides to at least increase the budget on investing in quality. And at the end of the day, no one wants to have their company at the front of the BBC or the Telegraph or on Wall Street Journal saying that there has been a crash or an issue which has led to the loss of millions and led to a lot of unhappy and unsatisfied customers. So at the end of the day, no one wants a PR disaster on their hands due to a lack of testing. So to kind of highlight some key points here, the revenue potential is rarely highlighted when companies are thinking about quality. So when we hear people think about the value of quality, it's usually centered around the risk and actually reducing risk. But we actually have to flip the conversation and think about revenue and think about how can we actually increase the possibility of revenue rather than just focusing on the risk side of things as well. And if we can start with that and move the conversation across and change how people think and talk about quality in that way, then it's an important step for us, for our quality teams, to not think of quality as a cost center, but actually think of it as an asset and a way for us to help to contribute towards business growth too. So we're really trying to move away from this model of thinking around the risks involved, which will then ultimately lead to savings, and then those savings will come to fruition, and that might lead to revenue potential. And really, we're trying to move that conversation, and we're trying to say, actually, what could happen is by doing this activity around testing, the goal is to hopefully increase the level of quality, which leads to an increase in revenue. By doing that, we'll ultimately also increase the number of saving costs that we'll be having, and ultimately that reduces the level of risk that we also have in the market. But at the end of the day, we're really focusing less on the risk side and more on the revenue side, and really trying to flip that conversation now. So I'd really love to understand from the comments, what do people currently hear about quality in their business? How is quality talked about in your business? Is it something that you find that people see as incredibly valuable? Is it something that we have teams who say that it's not really talked about, that there's been no focus around it? I'd love to hear in the comments if there's anyone who wants to kind of give an input when they're looking at the level of quality within their business right now.
I think we also have, just jump in here, we have a poll that we're going to be able to pull up here real quick. This is the first time, I'm going to be honest, this is the first time we've used this polling tool. And I don't know if we're going to be able to bring up the survey. Yeah, the biggest QA challenge. Okay, so we're gonna see if we can start that. No, that didn't work. So that's not working. So just go ahead and put your comments in the chat about your biggest QA challenge, and we will just continue on taking a look at everyone's comments and the comments you hear on quality. So if you can get in there, what your top 3 comments you hear about quality around the business. So I know that there's one that I have that I hear all the time. I speak to a lot of C-suite people and a lot of people that are, in charge of digital transformation and ensuring that they are helping large enterprise companies, kind of move towards the digital infrastructure. And I ask them about quality, and inevitably their response is, "Oh, well, we've taken care of that because we've implemented test automation." That's their response to digital transformation is, "Yeah, we got an automation vendor in, so we're good." In fact, I just had that the other day with a enterprise transformational vice president at a very large company in the US. So yeah, that's something that I hear pretty frequently.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were actually in the Eurostar conference in Prague last week, and that did come up a lot, whereby everyone has been looking to double down, or at least put all their eggs in one basket around test automation, or on one type or one area of testing. And I think it can be quite limiting in that there are innumerable benefits of adopting a certain approach. And of course, test automation is incredibly important across that. However, one of the issues that we see is that, again, it comes back to what we were saying, is that sometimes it can just be what people believe to be a silver bullet, but actually it ends up costing them more. It costs them more time. It means that they're not able to kind of collate the resources that they need to test at an appropriate level of quality, because they're constantly spending time reworking their tests, as well as spending time learning about these different tools in the market. But ultimately, a tool isn't going to help you implement quality. It's really down to the people that implement the level of quality, not necessarily a certain type of tool.
Great. We've got some good comments in here. So Mark Whittington says, QA challenge going from being the first QA person in the company, changing the mindset from being an afterthought to being an integral part of the tech team.
Yeah.
Pedro says, will we release faster with more QAs? Always a great question, and especially if you're trying to plan for a team and generate headcount, the answer is, well, if I give you more QAs, does that mean we'll get to faster? And we need quality KPIs. Good.
Show me the QA metrics, faster.
Yeah, that's always true. We know quality is important, but time constraint does not help give it much time for it as long as the basic requirements are met. That is good, because we do hear frequently, or at least, Farm, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but we do hear frequently from people that say, our sprint cycle is 2 weeks long, and we'll just cut, a couple of days off for testing, out of that sprint cycle. If we're running behind, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely, indeed. It does end up coming up quite a lot across that too. So as we look at kind of the next slide across that, so thank you everyone for the comments on that. So one of the key areas that we look at when influencing or thinking about different narratives around quality, and how do we actually now impact a certain level of quality, or how do we change the current narrative? And a lot of it comes down to influence. So again, when we think about influence, we think about influence and persuasion. And ultimately, it also comes down to being able to sell, in terms of being able to sell our ideas and our thoughts and our perceptions as to how quality is viewed and how it should be viewed, ultimately, I guess, in the eye of the beholder, per se. And one thing which I remember reading from Daniel Pink, so he's got an incredible TED talk around mastery. He's written a number of different books, one called Why to Sell as Human. And he said that people in non-sales based roles spend nearly 40% of their time, and this is not just work time, this is also throughout their entire 24-hour day. So when we think about going home to their kids or their husbands, their wives, to their other family members, 40% of that time is spent influencing, persuading, and convincing. And I know that when I go home and I speak to the family members that I have at home, and I know that Nick has told this to me a lot, when he goes home and he's speaking to his kids and he's trying to negotiate with them on the time that they have to stay up so that they could watch some more TV or some more Netflix. It's a constant struggle. And
constant struggle. Never ends.
Yeah, absolutely. And so really it's about knowing the motivations and the fears of the people that we actually want to influence. And so when we think about who we need to buy into our ideas, whether it be our teams, our line manager, the CEO, the C-suite, we really try and answer, or at least ask, a number of fundamental questions. So the first is, okay, we understand their perspective, but what are their goals? What are they trying to achieve, and what are they ultimately trying to do? Are they and partly this is, what are their team goals and their company goals, but also what are their personal goals? Are they trying to get promoted next year? Are they trying to lead, or at least capture more budget so that they could invest in other areas around, innovation, or implement new tools, or to try and be more of a thought leader in a specific area or industry within the company, or be a bit of a pioneer? And what challenges do they face in their day-to-day role right now? What are some areas there that we can specifically look to help them through and be able to implement a much better way of doing things, or at least be able to aid them on their quest to get to wherever they want to go? And when we present ideas to them, it's then, let's try and preempt why they're going to object to ideas. So what I like to do is I like to come up with at least 2 things that I know that whenever I need to present to, let's say, our C-suite and our senior leadership team, I would say that these are the 2 most common objections that they're going to have to my ideas, and how would I best go about overcoming those, and what do they look like as well. So it's really about focusing the discussion here on the actual end user and the customer, as well as the wider impact around business growth. So it's really going back to changing the language that we use to go about responding in a language that they're going to be able to understand. So we're really listening to, really seeking to understand, rather than just speaking or listening to then reply. And it's really important that we try and shift the conversation around what it is that they're looking to focus on too. So I just wanted to bring up a really short kind of example from an interview that we did with an engineering manager called Shesh Patel, who we actually met while speaking at another conference earlier this year here in London. And he's an engineering manager over at the New York Times. And he had brought up a way around how he goes about presenting ideas based on the person or the people that he's speaking to. So when he wanted to implement he told us this story this time, pretty much after the conference. It was at a pub, probably why we got so much great information on this particular story and so much rich level of detail on it. But when he wanted to implement a new project over at the New York Times to look at and improve some of their tooling and infrastructure, essentially the goal of this was to reduce the time it took them to run their regression tests. He adapted how he explained it to different people. So for instance, when he spoke to the leadership team, he really focused on the number of dollars that would be saved by implementing the idea, as well as what could be done with the savings to improve the team's ability to release the high quality products that they're looking to produce and looking to put out to market. However, when he was speaking to the product team, he highlighted how it would improve the whole team's ability to release new features quicker. At the end of the day, they're focused on improving the level of features they want to release so that they could ultimately improve the lives of the consumer that they're looking to impact and ultimately release a higher level of quality of product. But when he was speaking to the engineering teams, he underscored how it would affect their experience, emphasizing everything from how it would make their release process and their tooling process easier to the reduction of, let's say, flaky tests that they would have to deal with. And he knew at the time that that was also a major, major frustration for that team. So this was one idea, but he had about 3 to 4 different ways of aligning it with these different individual goals. That's a really, really good way of being able to change the way that you speak and change the language based on these different teams and different flows and approaches that you wish to take. So again, to kind of summarize on that point, it's really about building empathy and increasing alignment to understand how different teams interact, what they care about, what they think about. And one thing that we've done around this is we've looked at trying to help companies implement or at least advise them to implement cross-functional pairing teams. It goes back to what we said regarding autonomous cross-functional teams earlier, to then build that level of empathy and alignment across all of these different teams. And one example we always like to say is one that we read in a book by Ben Horowitz, who's a very famous venture capitalist out in the States, in Silicon Valley, for Andreessen Horowitz, and he wrote this book called Hard Thing About Hard Things, which anyone who's interested in entrepreneurship and startups should definitely read. And he gave this example of this movie, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, called Freaky Friday. So in Freaky Friday, what happened was 2 people had switched places for the duration of the movie, which ended up being kind of the main plot. And what he did is he had his head of customer success and his head of sales switch places for a day as they were at loggerheads. However, he felt that based on the information that he was getting from them and their challenges with each other, it would benefit to switch roles and be in someone else's shoes for a day so that they could better understand and be more empathetic to each other's challenges, goals, what they're trying to achieve, and how important it is to go about working together across that. So that was just one example as to how a team or how a company is going about doing that. And really, you're really looking to support your quality narrative with a certain with a level of evidence. Now, there are 2 different types of evidence that you can bring up here. So the first is around internal evidence. So this is really from inside your company. So speaking to a lot of different people across different departments to collect their thoughts on what they care about and what a culture of quality actually means to them and how it can relate to your company is going to be imperative. Now, the second type is the external side of evidence, which will just add a level of credibility to your idea. So this might be looking at going to conferences or reading certain books or referencing data from industry studies like the World Quality Report or the State of Quality 2020. And I think one thing that we've done within this book is really try to collate a lot of these ideas to help teams to essentially take around a copy of something which is a collection of stories from leading companies as to how they embed quality. So I think that's kind of been one of the big fundamental reasons and areas why we decided to do this. One example of a company who's had success with internal evidence is Airbnb. So in the early days of Airbnb, code was really hitting production, was hitting the production servers without many checks, and this was becoming incredibly problematic for them. So one of their engineers called Lou Kojak, he ended up implementing a really, really small internal experiment that he had written about, and I think this is kind of still live on Medium, or at least on the Airbnb engineering blog, whereby he had kind of rallied a few people to start submitting pull requests for their changes. And every new person who came in the company, that just became the new way that they were onboarded. And over time, all of the people who were quite set in their ways had to change, because everyone else in the company or the new people were trying to drive this new approach and a much more kind of quality first approach to what they were trying to do. So this led to kind of a huge amount of success across their approach, whereby all engineering teams then started to write tests with any new code that they were implementing. So taking a very kind of TDD kind of centric approach, while also educating teams on the importance of testing. And by gathering this level of evidence and rallying a few people internally and taking a very grassroots approach, it just led to Lou being able to influence the whole testing approach over at Airbnb. So again, by cultivating your internal champions, you're then able to rally different people within your company by nurturing different relationships with key executives, with stakeholders, to forward and reciprocate your vision, find like-minded people within your company, and therefore add momentum to your idea to help drive and build the momentum around the quality vision. But in order to do that, you need allies. You need people to help you. You need people to see your point of view and to really understand what it is that they're trying to do too. And one example that we thought that was relevant across this area was Spotify, who have specific and dedicated roles to people who are quality advocates and therefore implement or at least advocate for quality over at Spotify. So they really champion and put quality at the center of everything by sitting down with each cross-functional team and each of their squads and their chapters and their guilds to better understand how quality is looked at, how it's implemented, and continually doing retrospectives while also encouraging different members from different teams and guilds to work together in a more collaborative way, and also sitting down to share notes, exchange notes, and find out how they can forward on the vision for quality that they have. The other example that we have is one of Etsy, where a senior manager in the test engineering strategy group called Ali McSweeney was tasked with actually changing the engineering culture over at Etsy, where she wanted to increase the ownership of quality within the company, but she didn't have necessarily the necessary budget to go about improving and increasing that. So what she did was she created Etsy's first ever lightning talk series, where engineers could voice their ideas, their frustrations on a quarterly basis around quality and what they would wish to do to improve it, as well as implement some of their side projects or show off what they've been working on over a certain course of time. She also invited the C-suite and the leadership to these lightning talks, and the leadership teams were then able to truly understand what it was like being on the ground and understanding their situation and their reality, as well as their workload, to then be able to improve quality, to implement certain tools, to try and focus on how they look to implement that level of quality across the entire development lifecycle and allocate testing time in the right way, and make the right decisions and make the right changes by hearing what was actually happening. So if you want to improve your level of influence in your organization, there are a number of different things that you can do. And again, this is an entirely applicable skill across life, not just across your work life, but in a number of different areas. And so we see ourselves as being students of influence. And these are some of the books that, feel free to take a screenshot of or similar. that we have studied and looked at and have found to be the best, and that have been recommended to us by a lot of the people that we've described so far in this webinar. So that is how we go about creating a culture of quality. Now, the second idea is around how we increase the value of QA that is brought to the organization level. So again, we'd love to kind of put some comments in the chat right now around what metrics do businesses care about? I know that at our organization, and fundamentally at quite a lot, you think about things such as revenue to daily active users. I can imagine these are probably played out within your organization as well. I'm not sure if you're seeing anything in there in the comments around that, Nick.
Yeah, if anyone's willing to share maybe what metrics their business cares about the most, that way, it just helps to kind of give a sense for other companies. Yeah, Laura says revenue. That's obviously, I run both the marketing and the research function here at Global App Testing. So, revenue is always a big thing for us. Pedro has said user growth. Johnny has also said growth as well.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. So I think oftentimes we recognize that QA contributes to user growth, but ensuring that message is kind of sung up the ladder to the C-suite. It's not always clear. Daily revenue is another one as well. Absolutely. And, it's certainly acute when there's an issue that is affecting the ability for customers to transact with you. That's when people will suddenly realize the impact of QA on growth. When all of a sudden there's a bug in the checkout, and that's when QA suddenly has a seat at the table with the C-suite.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a number of different studies, we've ended up seeing that, especially across let's say e-commerce or retail, for instance, that there's over a seven-figure sum, so over kind of $1 million worth of transactions at a certain size of company, from anywhere from 1 to 10 million in revenue, and we've seen companies who've had that level of impact, whereby essentially a bug has been classed as like $1 million bug because of the level of impact that it has had, and it's been something that I feel a lot of companies then think about and work through too. So moving on here, so a couple of other questions. I'll just kind of get through this just in the interest of time on this. So, a lot of the metrics that QA teams might look at, and whenever I've done this at conferences, teams have said things like mean time to discovery or mean time to recover, essentially. So a lot of this is looking at the metrics for the QA teams and what they're focused on that ultimately would help them improve the work that they're doing. But really, when we think about the work that we've done, the research that we've done across this, it goes back to which metrics can teams affect that's going to have the biggest impact for the actual business. And really, it's about focusing on quality activities to help move that particular metric. And one thing which I've talked about throughout this webinar in a little bit of detail is around a growth metric. So the growth metric essentially is the one metric that has the greatest impact on growth. So again, that could also be where the customer gets the most value. Essentially for us as a business, it's the number of tests. For different organizations, for Facebook, I know they've recently changed it from daily active users to the engaged time or time well spent on their application. For I can imagine for a booking site like booking.com, for instance, or similar, it would be the number of bookings that have been made. And one thing that we've seen is there are 3 types of growth metrics that companies focus on. And I guess it'd be really interesting to know what sort of metric you feel that your kind of main metric really focuses on once I've kind of done explaining these. So the first is around attention. So the attention growth metric is things that I've already mentioned, like the daily active users or the monthly active users. So Twitter is a really good example of this, whereby they're constantly looking at the engagement of those monthly active users. How many people are logging back in each day, each week, each month from a specific cohort, a specific segmentation, or a specific geography. So that's kind of the attention-based metric that we have across this. Now the next is around a transaction-based metric. So Airbnb, for example, are constantly trying to shift the number, or at least increase the number of nights booked in specific areas, locations, geographies. if they, for instance, by the amount of data they have, they know that if a certain number of nights have been booked in a specific location by a certain time frame, i.e. 30 to 60 days, that is more like, I think they have a metric around 86% of those areas and neighborhoods are going to be successful and are going to have enough supply and demand for what they're trying to service at specific times. And the last one is the productivity metric. So for instance, Slack, the messaging app that everyone knows, loves, and uses, and now is slightly starting to hate the number of channels that can be created, found that their magic number was 2,000. So for a team of around 50 people at Slack, that's essentially around 10 hours worth of messages together as a team. So for a typical team of 10 people, that's maybe a week's worth of messages. And if they hit that, regardless of any other fact or any other preconceived notion or any other variable, after 2,000 messages and that amount of time spent, 93% of those customers are still using Slack today. So it really focuses on that level of retention and engagement and gives you a really informed opinion based on that level of data. And I'd really love to understand what are some of the types that apply to your company. We've already discussed kind of revenue in some of these areas as well, and I'm sure that each business is likely to be slightly different as we think about that. And I think one thing we'd love to maybe see in some of the comments is, what might your company growth metric be, or where would it be aligned? Is it more of an attention based, is it productivity or transaction based? And we'll come back to that as well. But feel free to put that in the comments now, and then if anything comes up, we can maybe kind of see how many people have got more of an attention based or a transaction based sort of metric as it comes about. Really, the area and the focus here that we wish to kind of bring across is the importance of focusing on testing activities which help move that metric. So if we're ultimately relating the work that we're doing that's going to help move the growth metric and ultimately influence your team's goals, your line manager and your CEO's goals, objectives, and the kind of KPIs that they put across the business, then ultimately you're going to be seen like a valuable member of that team. And that's how we've seen that a lot of the successful people we've interviewed have been able to influence the quality culture within those organizations and be able to bring across their ideas and continue to move up and therefore look at quality at a much more kind of holistic level across that. So the last example I just wanted to bring up was of kind of another story within the book of someone else that we met at a conference and interviewed for the book. And his name was Ilya Sakharov, where he is the director of quality assurance over at HelloFresh. So when he first joined, he discovered that quality teams were completely disconnected from the rest of the business. So in order to bridge that gap and that communication gap between the quality team and all of the different departments, he set out to get alignment between all teams through OKRs, so objectives and key responsibilities. For anyone who's kind of interested in that, there's a number of different books and areas that we can recommend to look at after, from the likes of Google to Eventbrite to Intuit, who've implemented OKRs. So the first step that Ilya did to make sure the teams were being exposed to the data on the number of subscribers, and that they understood why the work they were doing was important. Because a lot of people came to him and said, I'm just here to test. I'm just here to improve quality. But at the end of the day, they didn't really understand the wider implementations of doing that. And, I remember this story, and it might have been one of the kind of old school stories around this. And I'm sure that there's probably someone in the comments who can correct me on exactly where this has come from. But if you ask three builders different things about what they're building, one might say, I'm laying bricks. The other might say, I'm building a wall. And another one might say, I'm building a cathedral. And so it's really looking at actually what is your end goal and what are you trying to do and what are you trying to implement. So Ilya then he encouraged his teams to begin speaking in terms of the effect that situations would have on the number of subscribers. So when they performed risk-based analysis on where to test and which areas to focus on and what would have the greatest impact on the subscriber metric, and they ended up having much more fruitful and productive conversations and therefore be able to implement different ideas to what they were initially going to do. And so this led to them affecting the subscription metric in a more positive way. It led to the quality team paying more attention to the significance of, the A/B tests that they would have previously neglected, or what they were doing to really impact that level of growth. And they're also noticing a change in the team's attitude to their work. So their motivation had picked up, they were clearer on how they contributed to the company's success. And also the product management also noticed the difference, and the cross-functional relationships between all of those departments really began to strengthen as well. So those are some of the areas and the takeaways that we wanted to give. So to kind of summarize here, the first is around understanding what your company's quality narrative really is. The second is around becoming a student of influence, so that you can influence how people think and talk about quality within your company. And then finally, aligning your teams to the company's growth metrics, so that you're influencing the core metrics and allowing companies to work the best way that they possibly could. So again, this is the book that I've kind of referenced throughout this webinar. It's called Leading Quality and How Great Leaders Deliver High Quality Software and Accelerate Growth. This should probably be a tagline, which is a 2.5-year labor of love, with blood, sweat, and tears to write this. We actually thought this would take 6 months, and ended up taking 2.5 years, just like a testing project, 5 times longer than you initially think it's going to take. But we're incredibly happy with the outcome, and had some great feedback on it so far. So I'd love to extend some of the invitation to you guys around that to subscribe to that book. And these are just some of the companies that we've also interviewed throughout that. And also just before people end and work across this. So these are some of the companies that we have worked with, and we always love speaking to other people and teams around how they lead quality. So if you want to generally get involved, or at least have a conversation around quality, then please get in touch. But I wanted to leave everyone with a webinar with a free copy of the Leading Quality book, so an ebook version, as well as the audiobook version, which is read by Ronald Cummings John, one of the co-authors of the book, and he reads it in a very, very entertaining way. He also ad-libs throughout it, so it is a really, really entertaining listen. I definitely encourage anyone who's into audiobooks to do that. And even if you're not, definitely give it a go, definitely try it. I personally love audiobooks, and I think you'll definitely enjoy Ronald's take on him creating his first ever audiobook. So feel free to take that URL, or at least take a photo of that QR code right now, where you can get those resources, so the ebook as well as the audiobook. So I'll just leave it here for a second so people can do that. Cool, and that's my email address. So any questions from this webinar at all, please send me an email. If you've got any questions, if you've got any ideas, if you want to give feedback, absolutely very open to some of the ideas in this, or if you just want some thoughts, advice, more than happy to do that as well. And just wanted to thank everyone for their time as well. So thank you everyone for joining this webinar. I think we'll open it up to some questions now as well in the time that we have left, but I'll just leave it on this screen in case people want to take the URL, take a photo of the QR code to access those resources too.
I think Mark has the best comment so far. Has a hard copy of the book on his desk right now. Very good. Yes, we agree. But yeah, I mean, we want to give everyone an opportunity to ask any questions that they might have. We're here to answer those. We kind of already answered the question that we typically get. I got one through private message about how do you overcome, a culture that is very much silver bullet. But I think we've already kind of answered that question, or something that's so ingrained in that overall kind of approach to QA. And I think it's right to say that kind of the time times have changed, and it's certainly incredibly important that you constantly, especially if you're in a position where you're able to lead quality in your organization, that you are putting it at the forefront of everything that you do, and that you are getting a seat at the table and having those discussions with the right people. And that I know people have heard terms like shift left and shift right and those kinds of things, but this book isn't really about either one of those things. Instead, it is about kind of shifting to higher. That's a new thing. I've just made it up right here on this webinar. So elevating QA, shifting it up. Everyone's on a shift left, shift right. I want to shift it up so that it is more kind of on the higher level of the overall process within most organizations. So we've got some people typing some comments right now, but if we don't have any questions, I'm more than happy to just kind of give everyone 5 minutes back of their life. Really thank you for joining the webinar today. Hit the link to grab the copy of the book. If you are unable to get a copy of the book for whatever reason, or it's not working, or who knows, technology works so well until it doesn't, I'm more than happy to send you a direct file as well. You've got Fahim's email, fahim@globalapptesting.com. My email is nick@globalapptesting.com as well. And I'm more than happy to kind of send those out. And Mark's looking forward to the next webinar as well. So no pressure, Fahim. Although the next one is tonight at 7 p.m. GMT. It's the same content, Mark, so you don't have to come to that one. We're just doing it for folks in the US who also want to give it a listen. So Pedro is just typing something, and if you guys don't have any other comments, enjoy the rest of your day, folks.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Have a good day.